I don't know where to start, but honestly, it feels like this might be too long for Reddit. But I need to say it. I've sacrificed almost my entire adult life for my parents, and now, when everything seemed like it should finally get better, they still told me I'm a disappointment. My name is Alex. I'm 30 years old. I live in London, working as a developer in a small but stable IT company. My career has been going okay. I realized early on how important it is to save money, invest, and build my own future. My girlfriend, Emily, has been with me for 3 years, and I can honestly say she's the best person I've ever known, but more on her later. My parents, Robert and Linda, have always seemed to me like very unpredictable people. In my childhood, we lived a pretty normal life. We had a small apartment in the suburbs, Dad worked as a consultant, Mom in accounting. But gradually, their financial stability started to crumble. I never saw real poverty from them, but I could feel something was wrong. Mom was constantly complaining about bills, credit cards, some debts, and Dad kept putting off conversations about money. Back then, I thought, okay, they're adults, they'll figure it out. After university, I moved to London and started building my career. The first few years were tough. Small salary, long hours, but I had a goal. I didn't just want to earn for myself. I wanted to help my parents if the time came. And that time came. I found out they had a huge bank debt, almost £250,000, and that was just the tip of the iceberg. There were also credit cards, tax arrears, medical bills. They hid it from me, but the bank started sending letters, and I accidentally came across one of them. I remember that day like it was yesterday. I was sitting at home, printing out a report on my investments, and there it was, a letter from the bank threatening legal action. My first reaction was shock. How? Why didn't they tell me anything? When I asked my parents, they just shrugged and said, "We'll manage." But I knew managing without help was impossible. I could have just closed my eyes and said, "This isn't my problem," but I couldn't. I couldn't leave them in that situation. Over the next 5 years, I basically gave everything I earned to pay off their debts. I worked 12, 14 hours a day, took freelance projects at night, sold things that were dear to me. Every time I had a bit of extra money, I put it toward their bills. Emily supported me, though it was hard for her to watch. She said, "You're giving them too much, they won't appreciate it." And I always replied, "I'm not doing it for thanks, I just can't do otherwise." Gradually, the debts started disappearing. First the credit cards, then the medical bills, finally, the bank. After 5 years of intense work, almost without vacations, I closed the last account. The final numbers on the online banking screen seemed to scream, freedom. I was proud of myself, honestly. I thought that after this my parents would be grateful, that they would finally acknowledge, "Alex, you saved us." But no. That evening, when I went to them to say all the debts were paid off, they greeted me not with joy, but with criticism. "Well, finally you managed to do something right," Dad said. "You could have done it faster," Mom added. I stood there with burning eyes and an almost empty heart. 5 years of sacrifices, sleepless nights, stress, saving on everything, and this is how it is. They called me a disappointment. I couldn't understand how this was possible. Everything I did was for them, for the family, and I was ready to sacrifice everything, my career, personal life, sleep for them. And now they're saying I disappointed them. Emily saw me via FaceTime when I was trying to hold it together. She tried to comfort me. "Alex, this isn't about you. They just don't know how to be grateful." But how do you explain that to 5 years of life given without remainder? After that, I realized that the love and support I sought from my parents was an illusion. I was their savior, but in their eyes, an eternal failure. I started to realize that, despite my sacrifice, Their expectations and demands have no limits. They'll never be satisfied. And then I took the first important step for myself. I decided I wouldn't let their toxicity destroy my life anymore. I started investing in my own projects, in my own housing, in my relationship with Emily. We moved in together, opened a joint IT business, and gradually my life became more harmonious. I felt like I could be happy, even if they never acknowledged my efforts. The first months after the final payment were strange. I tried to keep in touch, invited them over, but every conversation turned into more criticism. I started responding more calmly, without getting into arguments. Sometimes I wonder, why am I still trying to earn their love? And every time I realize it's pointless. Real family is those who support you, who rejoice in your successes, not manipulate and devalue your efforts. Emily was my real family. She stood by me when I cried at night from helplessness and pain, when I felt unwanted. She reminded me that my sacrifices weren't in vain. They created the foundation for our life, for our future. And now, looking back, I understand. I didn't disappoint them. I only disappointed myself when I tried to seek in them what was never there, genuine gratitude and respect. Today, I live my own life. I build my career, love Emily, and we have everything we need for happiness. I don't blame my parents for their inability to appreciate me. I just don't let them control my emotions anymore. My story is one of betrayal, disappointment, but also personal growth. I lost 5 years of my life, but gained something more, understanding who I really am and who I want to be with. So if someone is reading this and thinks that sacrifices for family always pay off, sometimes they don't. But that doesn't mean they're in vain. Sometimes they open your eyes to the true value of the people around you, to those who really care. I shared this here because I needed to get it off my chest. Thanks for reading. After that evening when I fully paid off all my parents' debts, it seemed like everything should finally get better. I expected that now they would be grateful, that they could finally breathe easy. But reality was different. The next day, Mom called me, her voice cold. "You could have done more." More of what? I barely managed to say. "Well, anyway, you still disappointed us," she said and hung up. I felt my heart squeezing. Everything I did, every sleepless night, every extra project, every saving on myself, all of it turned out to be insufficient. I was their savior, but in their eyes, an eternal failure. Emily was there when I came home. She stayed silent, hugged me, and said, "You did the impossible, Alex. Don't let them destroy what you've built." But how can you ignore the pain when it eats so deeply into your heart? I tried to distract myself with work, but every call from my parents was a needle in my heart. Sometimes I caught myself thinking, maybe I'm just not good enough. Emily and I started talking more about the future. She suggested ideas on how to develop our small IT project that we started together. It was a way not only to work, but also to restore my sense of self-worth. Around the same time, my parents started applying more pressure. They called about checking our finances, asked when I could help them with apartment repairs, even after all the debts were paid off. One day, I decided to invite them to our home to show that our life matters too. I wanted them to see that their son is living his own life, that he's not a slave to debt. We set up dinner. I cooked everything myself. Emily helped. My parents came, but within an hour the dinner turned into criticism. "Why do you have such expensive chairs? Why aren't you working even more hours? You could have bought us a vacation trip." I looked at Emily and she just held my hand. I felt like that was a signal. Either I continue to tolerate their toxicity or I build my own boundaries. The next day, I sat down and wrote a letter. I took a long time choosing the words because it was hard. I explained that I couldn't allow their behavior to affect my life anymore, that my sacrifices were for them, but now I have to take care of myself. When I sent the letter, my heart tightened. It was scary because it was a step toward the unknown, but I also felt like it was the first real act of self-love. Gradually, I started seeing results. My relationship with Emily grew stronger, the business started bringing in income, and I began investing in my housing and education. I realized I could be happy even if my parents didn't appreciate me. But life sometimes throws unexpected challenges. A few months later, I got a call from the bank. My name was listed in some old debt of my parents that they forgot to mention. My heart tightened again, but now I knew how to act. I calmly contacted the bank, figured out the details, and quickly resolved the issue without stress and sleepless nights. Emily watched me and said, "See, you've become stronger. You can solve any problems and they won't break you." I started to realize that love and support don't come from parents. I had built up their idea of who I should be and tried to match it, but it was endless. Real love is when someone appreciates you for who you are, not for what you've done for them. At some point, I decided it was time to meet my parents in person. I wanted to finally close this cycle so I wouldn't live in constant anxiety and anticipation of criticism. I invited them for coffee at a small cafe. Sitting across from them, I spoke calmly without anger. "I love you, and I'll always be there if you really want friendship and respect. But I can't allow your expectations to destroy my life anymore." They were silent. In Mom's eyes, I saw a mix of surprise and irritation. Dad just nodded. No apologies, no acknowledgement, just silence. But I felt relief. I said my piece, set boundaries, and left. From that moment, our connection changed. I no longer felt anxiety before every call. I started living my own life. I went on small trips with Emily. We met with friends, made plans. A year after all these events, the business with Emily became stable. We bought a small apartment in central London, started thinking about the future. And I understood the main thing. Happiness doesn't come through saving others. It comes through understanding that your life matters in itself. Sometimes my parents call. Sometimes I hear criticism, but now it doesn't hurt anymore. I've learned to take it calmly, without emotional dependence. Emily is by my side, and her love reminds me that real support isn't words, but actions and presence. This story might sound tragic, but for me, it became a lesson. I lost 5 years of life trying to save my parents, but gained much more: personal freedom, real love, and understanding of my own value. If someone is reading this and feels pressure from family, remember, you don't have to sacrifice yourself for their approval. Sometimes you need to put yourself first to become stronger. Today, I live truly. I'm not the perfect son in my parents' eyes, but I'm perfect for myself and for Emily, and that's what matters. A few months after I set boundaries in my relationship with my parents, life started to improve. I felt the taste of freedom again, built the business with Emily, went on short trips, enjoyed simple joys. It seemed like the storm had subsided. But as often happens in life, the past doesn't let go that easily. One evening, Dad called me. His voice was unusually restrained. "Alex, I need to talk," he said. I felt a strange tension but agreed to meet. We arranged to meet at the cafe, the same one where I set my boundaries. When I arrived, Dad was already sitting at the table. He looked tired, aged over these years, with noticeable wrinkles on his forehead. I sat across from him, my heart pounding, not from fear but from inner wariness. "Listen," he began, pausing, "I've thought a lot about you and what happened." I stayed silent, not interrupting. "We misjudged you," he said quietly. "I understand that you sacrificed your years to help us, and we didn't appreciate it. I'm sorry." I felt a strange relief, but also skepticism. 5 years of sacrifices, endless nights, and now these words. Can they replace everything that was lost? "I appreciate that, Dad," I replied calmly. "But words don't change anything. I just want us to communicate without pressure and criticism." Dad nodded. He talked for a long time about his mistakes, about how hard it was for them to admit their debts and dependence on me. We talked for hours, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like he understood my pain. When I returned home, Emily greeted me with a smile. "How did it go?" she asked. I just hugged her and felt like a small stone had finally shifted from my heart. But the trials didn't end there. A few weeks later, Mom decided to interfere in my life in another way. She found a way to connect to my work through acquaintances and mutual contacts in the industry. She started calling constantly, giving advice, criticizing my decisions. It was a new level of pressure. I realized that simple forgiveness and talks weren't enough. I needed to act firmly. I sat down with Emily again. We discussed a plan: minimize contacts with Mom, build clear boundaries, focus on our projects and personal life. Emily was there every step, and her support became my real foundation. Around the same time, the business started bearing its first serious fruits. We got an order from a large company, projects grew, and I realized I could afford the dreams I had put off for my parents. But emotionally, I still carried wounds. Sometimes I caught myself thinking that anger toward my parents was preventing me from being fully happy. Emily helped me unpack these feelings. "You're not to blame for their flaws. Your life is your responsibility." One evening, when we were sitting at home discussing vacation plans, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I felt lightness. I started appreciating every moment with Emily, realizing that real love is support, not demands and manipulations. And that's when something unexpected happened. One day, an old family friend came to us, who knew about all my sacrifices. He told me that my parents were discussing me among acquaintances, and their opinion had changed a lot. People were talking about how I managed to pay off huge debts, how I kept my sanity and dignity. This gave me a strange feeling. I didn't do it for praise, but understanding that others see my strength and resilience gave me an extra incentive to value myself. A few months later, Emily and I decided to take a vacation in Spain. It was symbolic. We were leaving the past behind, building new memories, creating our own story. Every day we walked the streets of Barcelona, laughed, dreamed, and for the first time I felt free from the burden of the past. During this time, my parents tried to get in touch, but I had learned to manage my boundaries. They came with requests, but I no longer gave in to manipulations. I responded calmly, sometimes even briefly, and it was amazing. The world didn't collapse, life went on. And now, 2 years after that last debt payment, I understood that life can be beautiful. I maintained a relationship with my parents at a level of respect, but without emotional dependence. I built with Emily not just a home, but a real foundation of happiness. My story isn't about parents being bad or good. It's about how important it is to understand that your life is your responsibility, that love and approval don't always come from those we consider family, that sometimes you need to build your own boundaries to find freedom and real love. Emily often says, "You've become a different person, strong, confident, free." And I see in that confirmation that even through betrayal and disappointment, you can go toward personal growth. I lost years sacrificing myself for my parents, but gained much more. Understanding my own value, real love, career, and freedom. And if I could go back, I would still do the same, because it's through that I became who I am. Today, when I look at our life, our home, the business, the relationship with Emily. I understand that the real reward isn't in my parents' approval, but in what I was able to build myself. And that's more valuable than any gratitude. It's been almost 3 years since the day I closed my parents' last account. A lot has changed in that time. I've become more confident, learned to build boundaries and manage my life. Emily was there every step, supporting, inspiring, and helping me not lose myself amid the chaos my parents left. Our business with Emily became stable. We started with small projects for local clients, and now we worked with international companies. The financial freedom I once only dreamed of became reality. I could afford to live as I wanted, without guilt or pressure. But the real test was a meeting with my parents a few months later. They came to our home, not with requests, but just for dinner. It was their way of trying to restore the connection. I felt anxiety, but now it was different, not fear, but cautious readiness. We sat at the table, and this time the conversation was different. They didn't criticize, demand, or manipulate. Dad talked about the past, about his mistakes, about how he misjudged me. Mom was quiet, but in her eyes I saw regret and understanding. "We haven't always been good parents," Dad said, "but we're proud of who you've become." These words don't change the past, but they were sincere. I understood that true forgiveness isn't for them, but for myself. I could leave the pain behind and move forward. After dinner, Emily and I went for a walk through nighttime London. The air was fresh, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like all the weight of years on my shoulders had disappeared. We laughed, talked about the future, about dreams, and I understood the main thing. Happiness doesn't come through others' approval. It comes through inner freedom and the love of those who are close. In the following months, I started participating in charity projects. I realized I could use my resources and experience to help those who truly deserve it, not those who only demand. It was my conscious decision to direct energy where it brings joy and results, not into endless parental demands. Emily and I bought a house in the suburbs, small, cozy, but ours. We started traveling, building our own family, opening new opportunities for ourselves. Every trip, every shared goal, every evening at home, all of it was the fruit of our efforts and mutual love. I often recall the moments when I sacrificed myself for my parents. I don't regret what I did, but now I understand. The most important investment is in yourself. Love and support should be mutual, and if they're not, it's time to build your own path. One day, sitting with Emily on the terrace of our house watching the sunset, I said to her, "You know, I realized that real family isn't those who gave birth to you, but those who choose to be by your side and support you." She smiled, took my hand, and said, "And we chose each other." I understood that my sacrifices weren't in vain. They taught me to value myself, build relationships, make decisions, and not be afraid to be independent. I became stronger, wiser, and freer. Now when I tell this story, I understand. Every step, every pain, every moment of disappointment led me to this, to a life I created myself, with the person I love, and with the understanding that happiness is the result of my own efforts, not others' expectations. Sometimes my parents call, sometimes they ask for advice or help, but I no longer react emotionally. I helped them when I could, and now my energy belongs to me and Emily. And that feeling of freedom and peace is priceless. If someone is reading this and thinks that sacrifices for family always pay off, know that sometimes they don't in the usual sense. Sometimes they bring an inner lesson that changes your whole life. And that's the most important thing. Today, I live truly. My life is the result of my decisions, my efforts, and my love for myself and Emily. I understood that being a good son doesn't mean being a victim. Being a good son means being a person who respects himself, builds his life, and loves those who truly deserve it. And that, perhaps, is the biggest discovery over all these years.